Chapter 10. Great moments in presidential punking. Getting punked is nothing new. Long before Alan Funt and Candy Camera or Ashton Kutcher and MTV, people have been fooling one another for fun and for profit. Even the Bible records its fair share of impersonator pranks, though few of them were for the purest of motives. In Genesis, Rebekah and her son Jacob pulled the old switcheroo on Jacob's twin brother Esau and their father Isaac. In their Jewish tradition, the firstborn son would normally inherit the lion's share of his father's wealth, as well as the all-important blessing. Esau was just a few moments older than Jacob, but his mother wanted everything to go to Jacob. As Isaac lay blind and feeble on his deathbed, Rebekah dressed Jacob in his brother's clothes, covered his hands with goat hair, and prepared Isaac's favorite meal for her husband. Even though Isaac was suspicious and repeatedly questioned Jacob, the smell of Esau's clothes and the touch of his son's hairy hands were enough to fool him. A father's blessing was irrevocable, and Jacob succeeded in taking what belonged to his brother. But turnabout is fair play, and years later Jacob was on the receiving end of a doozy of a prank involving another firstborn child. After Isaac's death, Jacob fled his family home because he feared payback from Esau. As he journeyed, Jacob came upon a well where his uncle's flocks were being watered. Suddenly his eyes fell upon Rachel, one of the shepherdesses, whose beauty made him fall down on his knees and weep. Jacob immediately asked her father, his uncle Laban, for her hand in marriage. In those days, the bride's parents received a financial dowry from the groom. Apparently, Jacob had left home without his American Express card and didn't have any of his father's inheritance handy in large unmarked bills. So Jacob promised to work for his uncle for 7 years. 7 years! So he could marry Rachel. 7 years came and went. The wedding was a blur of drinking and feasting and more drinking. When Jacob woke up in the morning after his marriage, he looked across the bed and realized that he had actually married Rachel's older sister Leah. Laban explained that it was his people's custom for the older daughter to be married first, but if Jacob was willing to work for another 7 years, Jacob could take Rachel, the younger daughter, for his bride as well. Wow, payback can be tough. There's something in the human heart that likes to fool other people, even if it's only for fun. When it's that kind of punking, you can count me in. Every new morning promises some new adventure. Each new city presents some new opportunity. In 2004, I had an engagement in Boston that took me right by presidential candidate John Kerry's Democratic Convention headquarters. I just couldn't pass up something this fun, so I stopped in for a visit. The campaign was hectically preparing for its convention there at the Fleet Center, and they apparently didn't have any extra staff to watch the door. So I walked right in, like I owned the place, or rather like I was an incumbent president who went anywhere he dang well pleased. I made my way to the center of the room, commanded everyone's attention, and then, in my most serious Texas accent, announced, "I just came by to check out the competition." I must confess, punking is addictive. Wherever I go, I've got the opportunity to lift the mood and hearts of people I meet. Usually the person I've punked turns from punky to punker. I was standing backstage at the 2006 Gospel Music Awards when I saw Grammy, Dove, Stellar American Music Award-winning artist Kirk Franklin. Kirk is already a very animated guy, so when I tapped him on the shoulder, he almost jumped out of his shoes. After he got over the shock, a sly grin appeared on his face. "Hey," he said, "let's go back to the dressing room where my band and singers are getting ready. Send your Secret Service agents in, and I'll follow telling my guys that the president wants to meet them." That is exactly what we did. Needless to say, the whole room was in shock, and there, over in the corner, was Kirk Franklin, laughing himself silly. In January of 2008, I was in Atlanta for an event planners convention when it occurred to me that the world's largest cable news network was just a few miles away. I was staying with lifelong friends Joel and Trace Balin. They have a friend from church who happened to work at Turner Broadcasting's cable news network. We arranged to meet at the CNN Center around noon. The center itself is actually a 14-story office structure with an interior atrium that houses their network offices, as well as retail businesses and restaurants. As we entered the facility, Huge jumbotron screens were carrying an important news conference with President Bush live from the Middle East. We were escorted through the security area and onto the main floor of the bustling newsroom. Immediately, every eye shifted from the TV monitors onto me, and then back to the TV monitors, and then back to me again. In their very presence was the man they were watching via satellite, wearing the same blue tie and flag lapel pin. I looked around at everyone and said, "Hey, do you think I'm really dumb enough to go there? It's dangerous, so I sent my lookalike." There were double takes, there were triple takes. They had been bushwhacked. Suddenly, people were grabbing their own cameras and asking for pictures with me, then pulling me by the coat sleeve into other people's offices and cubicles to watch them get just as stupefied as they had been. It was a blast. As we made our way through the corridors of CNN, I saw screenshots of some of the most defining moments in recent American history. These people reported the news in all its glory and shame, detailing humanity's crowning achievements and unthinkable crimes. Every person I met was gracious and engaging, and I wished I'd had the time to speak with them about their place in history, not only in our time, but in the eternal scheme of things. Perhaps the most elaborate conspiracy to punk a national figure came in July of 2006 at the hands of Jerry and Jonathan Falwell, who wanted to surprise their dad, Dr. Jerry Falwell, on the occasion of their church's 50th anniversary celebration. Thomas Road Baptist Church was dedicating their beautiful new facility, and more than 20,000 people were attending the outdoor festivities, which would culminate with speeches, music, and a huge fireworks display. Dr. Falwell's sons had told their father to expect a surprise guest, but neither the storied evangelist nor the enthusiastic crowd was prepared when an impressive motorcade of police motorcycles, long limousines, and even the obligatory ambulance drove, sirens wailing and lights flashing, into the Liberty University Stadium. As my security detail opened the doors for me to emerge from the vehicle, Jerry's sons grew a little fearful that this would overwhelm their father, who had been in declining health for some time. So one of his boys leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry, Dad. He's just an impersonator." I can only imagine that the Falwell family must have had a fine history of practical jokes, because this seemed to make Dr. Falwell think his sons were trying to fool him into thinking that this wasn't the actual commander-in-chief. Jerry rose from his chair and headed straight across the stage to me, clasping both my hands in his. He looked straight into my eyes and warmly said, "Mr. President, thank you for blessing us again with your presence here." What a moment! As I took my place at the podium to speak, it became increasingly obvious to everyone that I wasn't really W. But it was also clear that this good-natured family prank would go down in the record books as one of the best ever. As I shared earlier, when it comes to punking, turnabout is fair play. I got my comeuppance on my 50th birthday. Kathy knows it's hard to prank a prankster, so she began her little conspiracy several months earlier by getting my manager to tell me that we'd been invited to perform in our hometown for the Florida Family Policy Council. This worthy organization, headed by my friend John Stemberger, is committed to the sanctity of human life and to the biblical model for marriage and families. I was honored to accept. My role was to provide some comedic entertainment and then introduce the keynote speaker, a Mr. Charleston. You need to know that I am fastidious about my performances, so I always arrive early to survey the venue, do a sound check, and make sure nothing is left to chance. This drove Kathy crazy because the event was actually a ruse for a surprise party, attended by more than 150 of our family and friends. After I was satisfied with the arrangements, I went backstage to stay out of sight until my appearance. When Hail to the Chief started playing, I knew it was a cue for Kathy and me to enter the room and step onto the small stage. But as soon as I entered the doorway, I was hit with a blinding spotlight that shone directly in my eyes the whole time. I wouldn't allow myself to say anything about it. After all, this show must go on. And the audience was cheering wildly, so everything seemed to be going fine. Little did I know that only a few feet in front of me sat my parents, my sisters, and all my friends from church. Looking back, it was the kind of crowd who would gather for your funeral. The good news was that I didn't have to die to get to be there with them. I went through my routine, played guitar and sang, and generally hammed it up like I usually do. But I couldn't see a thing. I had no idea Kathy was behind me making funny faces and generally mocking me when I wasn't looking. I thought the crowd was laughing so loudly because I was so on that night. Finally, the time came for me to introduce Mr. Charleston, whose birthday happened to be that evening. As I did, Kathy corrected me by saying, George, I think his real name is Charles' son, not Charleston. When she said that, the lights went up and I saw a room packed with a lifetime full of friends and family. There in the front, along with my mom, was my dad, Charles. The whole group burst into happy birthday, and I doubled over in laughter with the realization that I had been presidentially punked. Now I know how it feels to be on the receiving end of a loving prank. And you know what? It's not so bad after all. Author's note. Hey, I know I've stretched the impersonation metaphor further than it's probably ever been stretched, so I don't feel the necessity of having to spiritualize every single anecdote in this book. In other words, relax, kids. No questions for reflection homework tonight.